Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this very interesting panel on Latin America, a region that seems to be sometimes a bit invisible. I'm not sure why. I hope we can discuss about it right now. My name is Carolina Chimoy. I'm a journalist. I'm a correspondent for DW, Deutsche Welle, that's Germany's international broadcaster. I'm based in Washington, D.C. And it's a pleasure to be here in India and to be sitting here in this panel with this distinguished round that I will present you. They don't really need an introduction, but I will go very quickly through the names and the functions. I will start with Marcelo Ebrard Casaubon.
Hello.
Like in school, right? Welcome, and thank you for being with us. He's the Secretary of Foreign Affairs from Mexico. Mauro Vieira, he is the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Brazil. Welcome, Minister. Nicolás Domingo Albertoni Gomez, the whole name, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs from Uruguay. He is the youngest member, right, from the government in Uruguay. And Saurabh Kumar, Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs here in India. Thank you so much for being here. And last but not least, the lady in the room, María Elena Agüero, Secretary General of Club Madrid. Thank you for being here with us. Well, it's the second day of the Raisina talks. We have been talking a lot about the current situation in the world. We have a war going on in Europe, and the new global order is being decided in this moment, in the summits we are having, but also in the next years. And some countries would like to see a global order like it used to be before the war started in Ukraine, but some others are seeing this as an opportunity, right, to reposition themselves. The question is, where is Latin America in this struggle to find a new position in the new world order? Where are we going to see Latin America in the next decade? That is what I would like to discuss with you. And Secretary Ebrard, if we could start with you. Mexico is one of the biggest countries in Latin America. It's a very important country also because it's very close to the United States. Where do you see Mexico in the current situation? Is it unconditionally supporting the West, or is it finding its own path?
Well, as you mentioned, we have a very important commercial relation with the United States, but we promote and we have our own voice in the global affairs. This has been the Mexican tradition, and today is a top priority for us. So one thing is the economic integration, and the other one is your political position in the world. And we believe firmly in the Latin American and Caribbean unity in several aspects, in several issues, more now than ever, because of the region's reorganization of the world. So, for instance, we had the experience now, recently, the pandemic. If we don't organize ourselves a quick response with the capacity to produce vaccines, you can see really a disaster for us, because nobody cares about what's going on with Latin America if we don't have enough capacity to prevent and react to several risks. Just for mention this one, which has been just 2 years ago. So we have a self-sufficiency sanitary plan. So this is a way to prepare Latin American and Caribbean countries regarding the next pandemic, maybe in the next 10 years or even less. This is a lesson. The main lesson from the pandemic is, as far as you can be united, coordinate your efforts, cooperate between the countries in Latin American and Caribbean basin, you are going to be succeed.
Yes.
Other way, no.
Secretary Ebrard, that is the never-ending story of Latin America, right? Unity. Are they going to achieve that? And we have here very distinguished guests representing the region. Minister Vieira, do you think unity is possible in Latin America in order to have a solid position in the global order and the new global order?
Yes, no doubt. Thank you for your question. I think that Latin America has already shown and proved unity in so many different occasions and so many different questions. I totally agree with Marcelo. I believe that unity is important in moment of crisis, and it was the case during the pandemic. And besides unity, I think we have also to promote everyday multilateralism. It's very important for our region. We have to be active in multilateral fora. It's a principle, the defense of multilateralism is a principle that is enshrined in our constitution. It's one of the main principles that orient foreign policy. So unity and multilateralism, this is our strength.
Latin America, though, has different governments. The title of the panel where we're sitting today is The Rhythm of the Left. How can different governments be united? Is that still possible, even though they are from different sides? No, I'm sorry, it's for Minister Vieira. It was just a follow-up question.
Well, yes, I have no doubt we can be united, even though some of the countries have different political positions and ideologies or orientation. Because I think that it's the main goal of every and any government is to defend the national interests. If you defend your national interest, that's the position defended by President Lula. We talk and we speak and we discuss with every country because we are seeking the national interest. And the national interest, of course, we cannot forget that when we talk to our neighbors. We have two neighbors here. One a direct neighbor with a big border line with Brazil, which is Uruguay, and Mexico, who is in the same region. We do not have a border, but we have a border in the sense of commonality of positions. Mexico has always been an important country in terms of non-alignment, as Brazil has had too, the same position. I think there's, and by the way, we have very similar presidents with very similar positions, so it makes, of course, things easier.
Vice Minister Alberto Gomez, Uruguay is one of the smallest countries in South America, but it's well known as a very solid democracy in the region. And you're strengthening ties also with India. You just came from inaugurating the first Chamber of Commerce, right, here in India.
Yes.
Where do you think if I may say so, perhaps chaos we are in now, the storm, is that an opportunity for Uruguay? Do you also think that Uruguay can reposition itself there?
Okay, thank you, Carolina. First of all, you know, from a Uruguayan perspective, I would like to say that this context, international context, but also the regional context, really, that for sure we are in a shift politically. Maybe, indeed, that's the title, the original title of the conference. But when you are part of a country that's the principle of dialogue is a state and not just a government policy, you end up not being that concerned, you know, with this kind of shift that we live in the region. So this one chapter again in Latin America, but internationally, we are, as my colleagues just said, we are convinced that multilateralism, you know, in this context is the remedy. There is no other remedy, you know, in this context than multilateralism. And our region has already a great platform for that. If we consider the regional initiatives we have already, are 33 regional initiatives. We are for sure the most integrating region in the world. What is happening? That we have to transform this architecture in real, you know, results. And I think the real results, not just go in quantitative, you know, and results or trade dynamics that we are always looking for, and of course it's very important for our countries. But given the uncertainty we have in the world, I think we have to work more on dialogue and working on a qualitative integration that unite us on the democratic and institutional values. And I think this will be the best way to use a platform we have already, as I mentioned, are 33 regional initiatives when we consider all the names, Mercosur, Aladi, and all what you can put there. So we have to use them, again, not just quantitatively, but also qualitatively to have a good result in this international context.
Because unity would make, of course, the region more attractive for other countries, like, for example, India, Secretary Kumar. Is that the case? Do you also think, are you missing a unity in Latin America to strengthen the ties with the region, or do you think it's fine how it is like it is right now?
Well, how the countries of Latin America organize themselves, it's for the countries of Latin America to decide. But you see, the point I would like to emphasize is that in recent years, we are giving a lot of emphasis and importance to this part of the world. And this is reflected in the increased engagement we have had. Before coming here, we were just trying to see how many high-level visits we have had to and fro. And from India's side, at the president, vice president, we have had 6 visits, starting from 2014, when the present government came to power. And at the prime minister level, 4 visits. Return visits have been 7 each at the level of president and vice president from Latin America to India. And amongst these, you know, most of the countries, if not all, have been covered. I think Indian business is showing particularly very keen interest in Latin America. This is not new, but something which is building up. And
which are the main sectors?
So if you look at sectors, IT is a very important sector. Pharmaceuticals is another important sector. Fertilizers, chemicals is another, pesticides, because a lot of the countries are, you know, agricultural producing countries, so this is another area. Automobiles and two-wheelers, three-wheelers, this is another segment. Hydrocarbons is something where we have investments in countries like Brazil, Colombia, Venezuela, and we are looking at the possibility of new investments in Guyana. The Guyanese president and vice president have visited India this year itself, and we have had good discussions with them. And there are a host of other sectors. Ethanol, I think we have an Indian company which is providing all across Latin America the machinery which is utilized for the manufacture of ethanol.
Could you share with us a figure? How has it increased in the last 10 years, perhaps?
Well, if you go by trade figures, it is almost touching 50 billion US dollars, which is, if you look at what our ministers, the point which our minister tries to emphasize is that if you look at our relationship with our other major partners, may it be ASEAN, US, China, the trade is around 120 billion US dollars. So Latin America is not too far behind at 50 billion US dollars. This is in absolute terms. If you look at the increase, I think it has been very, very significant in the last few years. Touching, I think, in certain cases, it varies country by country, but in certain cases, it has gone up even as high as 60, 70% increase.
60, 70% increase. That is impressive indeed.
Yeah.
Okay. Ms. Agüero, Club de Madrid was created to promote democracies around the world. And this is, of course, also important because it makes the region more attractive for investors and on an international level. Where do you see Latin America now in this function of Club de Madrid?
Thank you, Carolina. It's important to realize that when the Club de Madrid was created or established in 2002, many of us thought that democracies were on the rise, that democracies were going to multiply like the fishes and the loaves, but we've seen over the years that that isn't the case, and that democracy and democracy itself is under threat, and such as multilateralism is under threat. And these are two areas in which we have been working as an organization quite intensely over the past years. Now, in this sense, and where does Latin America lie? I think that in Latin America also it is important to realize that democratic practice is under threat. We have had elements like elections. Yes, elections have taken place. In fact, there were numerous elections even during the pandemic. And yes, in many of those elections we have seen the shift, but it is important to realize that in some cases institutions have been strengthened, but in others, unfortunately, this is not the case. And authoritarianism or populist governments, we have seen them in the past years, and we are concerned about the institutional strengthening of democracy in the region, and of democracies in the region. Now, I think that there are important shifts. Certainly, in the case of Brazil, the recent elections have opened up in many ways a hope of democratic recuperation in the region. But then we have cases like Nicaragua, which unfortunately are quite dramatic in terms of the authoritarian turn that it is taking.
And comparing it to the rest of the world, would you underline that Latin America still has a big amount of functioning democracies, or wouldn't you really point that out?
No, I think yes, it does, and it is in many ways a region that is continuously addressing that. It is a region, though, that has, and we have to be very frank about this, it is a region that has serious challenges in terms of inequality and in terms of growth. And those are two elements that do affect, on the one hand, the delivery, or our evidence of weaknesses in delivery of democracies and of the democracies in the region. And we have seen protests, important protests in the past years, mainly associated to that. But it is or mainly as a result of these two elements. But yes, I think Latin America continues to be concerned and working towards strengthening its institutions, its democratic institutions.
Minister Ebrard, Elon Musk, as we know, is planning to invest a lot of money in northern Mexico, in Monterrey. President López Obrador announced it on Tuesday. And also many manufacturers that used to work for US companies in China have now shifted to Mexico. So do you think this new shifting in economics and in politics is a positive movement for Mexico?
Well, I think that it's obviously it's a great opportunity. We call it near shoring or friendly shoring. The recent announcement from Tesla is not the only one. We have recently BMW from Munich. They are going to start to produce batteries in Mexico. So right now, nearshoring, and for us a top priority in order to accelerate electromobility and the energetic transition of the country, because everything is changing faster than planned. So we are going to have a shorter term than planned or expected in order to be producing enough clean energy and to move the car industry to electromobility. We have less time than planned or expected. So that's why we are moving fast in this regard. At the same time, I should say that several Latin American countries has opportunities, similar opportunities in different fields at the same time, because we are living a great shift in the economic supply chain and the economic organization, I should say, right now in the world. So we have a lot of possibilities.
And India is also an interesting possibility for Mexico. You will open a consulate on Monday here in this country, right? So how are these relations with India changing
We are
or
working
evolving?
very hard with several companies from India in pharmaceuticals and medical, should say, new breakthroughs in medical science. And so I see that in the next 3, 4, 5 years, we are going to see a really important increase in this kind of relationship between Mexico and India. It's growing very fast. It's based on trust and a common agenda about not only the price of the medicines, which is a great issue in Latin America. Just to say, for inform the audience, the difference in prices between a pharmacy in one corner in Mexico and a pharmacy here in the corner for medicines, very, very common ones, is about 35%. That's such an important difference. So you can imagine the meaning of that in terms of quality of life in our country. So we are talking about vision and policies that we share with India in order to improve the conditions of the majority of the population. So we are going to see in the next years an increase in these kind of initiatives with India.
Vice Minister Albertoni, is Uruguay also, because you just inaugurated the Chamber of Commerce, are you also looking in that direction, or why was that important today for you to inaugurate the Chamber of Commerce? The first one, actually, right?
Yes, yes. We are celebrating the 75th anniversary of our diplomatic relations. Indeed, with the Secretary on Monday, we want to have political consultation. So I think we are in a great, moment in our bilateral relations. And Asia in general, I think for our country is something that, in general, for Latin America, is something that we know that we have to improve our trade ties, because it's a way to show that this regional integration that we're talking about is a platform, but not an anchor, of our development. And I think we see in India, given the values we share, democratic institutional values, a great partner in Asia. So that's why, in general, of course, Asia is very relevant for us as a country, but specifically India is something we are putting more focus on. That's the reason why we have this new Chamber of Commerce between both countries.
So that is the economic part, but then we have geopolitics and the role that these emerging economies are having right now. Like, for example, Brazil. Minister Vieira, you had a meeting with Minister Lavrov here during the Rising Talk and the G20, of course. How is Brazil positioning itself as a possible mediator, perhaps, in the Ukraine conflict with Russia, or where do you see your country in that sense?
Okay, well, by the way, I had 20 bilateral meetings here.
In 1 week?
Yes, in 2 days. So I met a lot of my colleagues, ministers of other countries, and yes, we met with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, with a country with which we have very old and traditional relations. We have 195 years of bilateral relations with resident ambassadors, and we'll be celebrating 2 centuries in 5 years. So it's not myself, President Lula has said many times and repeated that he has heard so many mentions to war and arms and very little say about peace. He is calling for, he's not making any proposal or presenting any specific plan of peace. He's just calling the attention of people all over the world and countries that something has to be done, that we have to look for an alternative, a way out of this crisis, and he is ready to cooperate with other countries. Nobody can do that together, to generate some kind of momentum that would lead to later negotiations. But that's what we are looking at. We have also excellent relations with Ukraine and bilateral trade, and we have a large diaspora of Ukrainian descendants in Brazil. So we keep talking and in contact with both countries.
Well, China has a very specific proposal for peace. Is that an alternative for Brazil to work with?
Of course, no doubt. We are ready to work with all countries that have the same desire, the same wish to look towards an issue, to look towards an exit of the situation, and to open a way for negotiation with a view to peace in the future. We are ready. It's good that they have a plan. We have to examine. I haven't seen it in details, but I think that they have to be examined by both sides and start a conversation after that.
Talking about China, the Chinese influence in Latin America is also quite big, especially during the last decade. Do you, Ms. Huerto, see a risk in that, or do you think it's a positive development?
I think that it's important to, number one, maintain dialogue and to have as open as possible a conversation, a dialogue to understand the needs of both regions, the needs in this case of China and the region of Latin America. And I wouldn't say that I see it as a risk. I see it as a reality. And it is something that is happening. The level of investment and the presence is big, it's important, and to be able to understand it and to be able to manage it is very, very important for all of the countries and for the region.
Secretary Kumar, is that something that would worry India, the strong presence of China in the region, or is that just not important for the steps you're planning to do in Latin America?
Well, again, I think I would repeat what I said in my earlier response. It is really for the countries of the Latin America to decide and choose on their partners. And of course, I'm confident that while doing that, they would make assessments which serve their national interest and take into account some of the realities which we are seeing now around the globe and the risks which overdependence on particular countries have created. I think the minister was mentioning about friend-shoring and shorter supply chains. So these are the consequence of realizations which different countries have had as a result of our experience in the last 2 or 3 years. But as far as we are concerned, we would like to see, and we are happy that things are moving in the direction of greater engagement, economic and commercial engagement, which India is having with Latin American countries, and we would like to see that deepen further and getting more broad-based.
Which are your most important countries in Latin America for the cooperation?
In terms of trade, I think Brazil is the largest trading partner. Mexico is a close second. We import crude from Mexico. We are buying a lot of cooking oil, as I told you, from Brazil and Argentina. We are looking at some critical minerals from the region which help us in our e-mobility program. Argentinians did an important project in India, which is production of a radioisotope which is used for medical purpose. The plant was commissioned recently and would be inaugurated in a couple of months' time. So over a period of time, what we are seeing is that our relationship is getting strengthened, and we would like to give further push to that, and that is reflected amongst other things in our articulations at senior levels and the bilateral high-level exchanges which I mentioned to you, which have picked up momentum.
Would you say this growth, would you say that has been changed since the war in Ukraine started, like on an economic level? For example, talking about cooking oil, did you?
Yes, I gave you that example. You know, we were buying a lot of sunflower oil from Ukraine, and because of a disruption in that trade, we are picking up a lot of soya oil from Argentina and Brazil, and that is one of the reasons why our trade figures have jumped up as significantly as I mentioned to you. So yes, I think the war has had its consequences, and one of them is that we are looking at Latin America for some of the trade lines which got disrupted.
As a lighthouse.
Yes, of course.
Okay, I will have to close the round so that we can take at least one or two questions from the audience. But before that, I would indeed like to know from you, Secretary Ebrard, and from you, Minister Vieira, and from you, Vice Minister, if you see your countries as a lighthouse, and why, in one sentence, please, because otherwise we're not going to have the time.
Difficult task.
One sentence.
I'm sorry. I'm a TV person.
I am very, very, very optimistic about the possibilities of the Latin American reaction and actions in several issues. It's not a sentence, but let me say that why I am optimistic about this, very short remark. For instance, right now we are organizing President Lula, President López Obrador, President Fernández, Zoom meeting the next 5 of April in order to share products in order to reduce inflation. So Brazil with a list, Argentina other list, Mexico other list, Colombia maybe another one, several countries, in order to immediately open the door to this commerce, which can help us to reduce inflation, alimentary mainly.
And Argentina is also
Argentina, Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, maybe other countries,
okay.
Cuba and other countries, I don't know.
So building a lighthouse.
In the short
indeed.
term, against inflation. That's why I am so optimistic.
Minister Vieira,
yeah,
you're optimistic as well? You see
yes,
Brazil as a lighthouse?
I am optimistic for the same reason. It's, as I said, unity, multilateralism, cooperation, and brotherhood, because we are very similar countries in so many ways. Sometimes we're not that close, like Mexico, but we feel and we behave the same way. So I think we have this very good opportunity, and it's true, we can be, all of us, the whole continent can be a lighthouse.
One phrase indeed, you know, from a Uruguayan perspective, I think that coming from a small country economically, but a strong political country in the region, and you just said that, if there is one single message that I want to give, and given this international context, is that the condiment we can put in this integration and friendship we already have, is to know that development right now in this international context is not just a matter of an economic dimension, it's getting more and more a matter of a political dimension. Sometimes we said, you know, in Uruguay that more than currencies, we need values, you know, and we need to promote that values. And again, given the uncertainty we live, bolstering our institutional democratic values, I think is a good thing. And also, from a Uruguayan perspective, we think has been a very good rule, you know, for the development we achieve, even being a small economy.
And the last word goes for Ms. Güero. Do you see a lighthouse in Latin America, and why?
I definitely do, and I think I do because there is energy, there is a willingness to, as we heard from the ministers, there is a willingness to collaborate, to work together, and to find that unity that yes, we have been seeking and we have had at certain moments, but that will make us make the region stronger, very definitely. And I think that also the willingness and the engagement of the countries in terms of the social development agenda, and I'd like to add that element, Vice Minister, the social development agenda to what you were saying before is very, very important.
Thank you so much, and I would like to open the floor for questions. One there, please, and then we go to the second one. Do we have a microphone? The lady here in the front.
Hello. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the presentations. I am Camila. I am advisor for international relations at Rio de Janeiro City Hall. I'm from Brazil. I have a question that is mainly for the Latin American authorities, but I think all the panelists could answer that.
Can you address it to one person, please? Because I don't think we're going to have the time for all of them to answer it.
Mr. Vieira and or maybe Mr. Gomez, if you feel up to it. I was wondering how the panelists have been engaging on the preservation of regional public goods and how they are enforcing this dialogue, all they mentioned at some point that the region has. I think we, during COVID, have experiencing a shrinking of multilateral spaces and a shrinking of dialogue. We lost UNASUR, for example. And so how you are working to engage on this dialogue and on preserving public goods, just like our people's health. That's all.
Would you like to address the
goods, by the way, sorry. Regional public goods, what do you, in general, trade?
Mainly health, thinking about COVID-19, but I think we need to start this dialogue because we are now starting to discuss how we are doing mitigation and adaptation for climate change, for example, and we should consider climate a public good as well.
I have a quick response on that. I think COVID was a good example of how much we can work together. We didn't have, as Marcelo just said, a regional response on that, you know, and I think was, and for sure, given, you know, the numbers and we could have another pandemic in the future, and I think we really have to change our way of our trade platform. And if we want to be this part of friend-showing dynamics, we have to become friend of the rest of the world, and even become friend of each other. Intra-trade, right now in Latin America, is 15%. So if we compare with other regions, you know, if it's very low, so it doesn't, it's a very like difference between the regional and integration we have with the trade and intra-trade dynamics. And I think health is a way to show that we didn't have a regional response, even though we have very good and a good regional platform, but we didn't have that conversation in any way.
Secretary Ebrard,
just to add two things. In the recent past, the combination of Mexico, Argentina, AstraZeneca, so we produced enough vaccines for 17 countries. Other way, we didn't have any other option. Now, we are working with 10 regulatory agencies in order to create the Latin American Regulatory Agency, because we have different kind of regulations. So we are unifying this. This is going to be a very important step in order to give public goods for our people. We are in this right now.
Thank you. One more question, perhaps even two. Yes, please, here. The microphone, please. First row, and then I will take one more from back there.
Hello, good evening. My name is Torsten Bender from the Global Public Policy Institute in Berlin. Ministers Ebrard and Vieira, I wanted to ask you about the title of the panel, which was The Rhythm of the Left. And we haven't talked much about that rhythm. And I'm just curious what the rest of the world can learn about the rhythm of the left in Latin America, and especially if you could comment also on the differences or similarities, how the left engages with the military in your respective countries and what we can learn from that.
If I may add something to that, we had a previous discussion about the title, and some of the members were not really, wouldn't say that it's a rhythm of the left, because there are different shades, but thank you so much for mentioning that. I should have mentioned it at the beginning. Please, Minister.
Well, okay, thank you. Well, the title is a reference, of course, to the shift in power after the elections in so many countries in the region, especially in our country, in Brazil. It was a very big shift after the elections that took place in October. But as I said, repeating what I said before, in terms of policy and foreign relations with the region, it makes no difference what's the position or the ideology of the country. Brazil has 10 neighbors, and we have to keep and maintain very good relations in the name of our national interests with our neighbors. We have 10 neighbors, including one European country that has a very long, France has a very long borderline. It's the longest borderline of France is with Brazil. So we have to talk with all countries, France and all the other 9 South American countries, and to discuss issues of great importance like the environment, the Amazon forest, and so many others. And as it was said before, we have many mechanisms in the region to deal with these questions. So we are immune to these shifts in ideology. When and if they happen, we have instruments to continue to talk through our regional institutions.
Yes, definitely different shades also on that. There's someone in the middle. Yes, please.
Yes, hello, my name is Clara Bülow. I work with the International Committee of the Red Cross. And my question will be for Mrs. Agüero. So precisely about this shift towards the left, there is a political scientist named Andrés Malamud who pointed out that of the last 11 elections, 6 were won by the left, but 10 were won by the opposition party. So I wanted to ask, in fact, how much are we seeing a shift to the left, and how much is it actually a vote for change? Thank you very much.
Who do you address your question?
Mrs. Agüero.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, those are the facts, and that is we have to think what caused that, not just whether it's to the left or to the right, but to the opposition, as you pointed out. And that very clearly is a result of the very, very deep discontent and dissatisfaction that there is, among other things, for the 2 characteristics that I mentioned earlier, the inequality and the lack of economic growth. And we've got to also understand that the pandemic had an impact, as the minister and the vice minister were saying. The response perhaps wasn't fast enough, the delivery. And democracy is all about delivering well and delivering, among other things, on that social development agenda. And so I would say, I would agree with Andrés Malamud in that sense, and say that it is the shift to the opposition, and when there is discontent, in many ways it's a natural human reaction, and fortunately there were elections so that people could express themselves in the ballot box, and not necessarily through demonstrations or protests, of which we had quite a few since 2019, 2018.
Thank you so much for this distinguished round, for this nice discussion. I hope you're more interested in Latin America than before once you get out of this door. I can't take any more questions, but I hope we can gather again in this round. Thank you. Time is up. Exactly.